Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming at you from the Mozaic Works studios. And what I have for you today is a reaction to an article about how much faster can coding assistants really make software delivery. Now, the reason I am discussing this article is because on one hand, it has some interesting results that I would like to get into, but the most important part, I think, is that it gives us a way to verify in our own organizations the impact of code assistance. This article is a little bit older. It's from February 2025, so a few months back. The coding assistants have evolved since, and so it's possible that some of the findings do not fit anymore, but the methodology is still valid, I think. So it's interesting to discuss it for these reasons. You know that software coding assistants are here to stay. AI will be a part of software development. I'm pretty sure about that. And I've done a few videos on how I believe it helped, or how they helped me actually. And there are a few things where I think the input is invaluable. One of them is when I tried to do certain tasks and I knew that I had to do them, but I just put them off because I did not have enough knowledge about technology and I did not have enough time to focus on reading, learning everything that was about the technology. But with experience you learn what works, what doesn't, so and how to simplify things. So one thing where Claude in particular has helped me a lot is where I was trying to solve certain problems, like for example create a Gutenberg block in WordPress, which is something I have never done, and there's a lot of materials on doing it, but it's much better to generate an implementation, look at it, read it, and figure out, oh, this is too complicated, we can simplify there, we can remove this, and so on. There are a lot of things that you can do that are, with experience that come easy. But having this first draft is invaluable, and then having the possibility to ask Claude of, okay, so isn't this too complicated? Isn't this kind of do probing questions around it? Made me solve problems that I put off for a very long time. So with this, invaluable. Another place where I think they are extremely useful is generating prototypes to test various things. Again, invaluable. Another example is I set up a tech lab here at Mozaic Works, and it involved configuring things, doing a lot of DevOps, and I have knowledge of DevOps, but I didn't have the knowledge of all the necessary details that I needed to take into account for that. And since it's a lab, it has fewer restrictions than a production environment, right? The whole goal of the lab is to try out things. So in order to do that, it's very useful to have these assistants that can help us do things. Where it didn't help so much is in writing code that is actually useful. So especially when I'm working on a larger code base, it's kind of hit and miss, even with the newer versions. So yeah, these are my experiences. And it's interesting to see that these experiences kind of match with what they found. So what they found, briefly, is, by the way, this is written by Sichu Zhang. I don't know how to pronounce this, so I apologize. It's been published February 2025 on the Thoughtworks website. And the brief is, the claim that coding assistants can increase delivery speed by 50% is a wild overestimation. Our tests suggest the gains are more likely 10-15%, but there's still a significant gain, and given the current price of coding assistants like Copilot, incredibly costly. The metric that dominates discussions about the impact of coding assistants on software delivery teams is speed. While it may be referred to as productivity, what people really mean in most cases is how much faster are we? That's why we expect the answer to questions about productivity improvements is usually a single percentage value. However, while industry hype started at 50% productivity gains, it appears thinking has swung to the other extreme, with people talking about a complete lack of productivity gains and instead a 41% increase in bug rates. And I think the experiences would vary wildly depending on your context, which is why I believe the best way to do this is to actually do the measurements yourself within your context. While equating productivity with speed is certainly open to question, we don't wish to explore that here. We'll look specifically at how a coding assistant can improve speed. True speed itself can be difficult to pin down. However, in the context of software delivery, the best proxy variable we have for speed is story cycle time. So this already implies that a few things, right? First, you know how to write stories that are, how would I say, that help incremental software delivery, which is already a limiting factor. Second, you measure cycle time, and the cycle time is not necessarily bogged down and increased by a lot of extraneous elements. What I mean by this, if you have a lot of useless meetings, if you have a lot of technical debt, then you start seeing a lot of variability there. So these are factors that you need to take into account when making these metrics, when measuring these metrics. So yeah, cycle time, very useful measure, but it's useful to identify the error in the error that comes from the natural variability inside your system, and see if you can remove some of that variability before measuring the results, right? At least that's how I see this. It may be difficult in some contexts, and then you can just take it as it is and see what you get. But keep that in mind. It should be part of your methodology. To get an idea for the ballpark of cycle time improvements that are possible with a coding assistant, we have been using a heuristic, a kind of hypothesis about team gains when using a coding assistant over the past year, and have been comparing it with the data and anecdata, I like this term, first time I see it, we receive from our teams and our clients. Okay, and so here we have a table. Let me make this smaller so that you can see it. Scenario, it's optimistic. 40% of cycle time spent on coding. Oh, okay, so they actually take this into account. That's the interesting part. How long out of the cycle time you actually spend on coding, because that will be the thing that's affected. That's what I was trying to explain. But they do a good job here. Part of coding supportable with coding assistant, optimistic, is 60%. That sounds a bit optimistic. Rate of task completion with coding assistant, 55%. I'm not sure what this is. Estimated time saved in cycle time, 13%. So the optimistic value is 13%. The average value of estimated time saved in cycle time is 7%. while the pessimistic one is 2%. So what this means is that you could get anywhere from 2 to 13% improvement. Now, given the price tag of these assistants, it's probable that even with 2%, you gain some value, but if you are at 7%, I think you definitely gain some value. That's, again, a ballpark calculation. You'd have to do it for yourself. We make the following assumptions for the optimistic scenario in the table. Part of a team cycle time spent on coding, 40%. Portion of that coding that is supportable by a coding assistant, 60%. Whenever the team is using the coding assistant, they are 55% faster. Okay, so that's what that means. Those assumptions lead to a maximum decrease in cycle time of 13% for this scenario with very optimistic assumptions. The mileage will vary for teams based on their experience level, tech stack, and the types of tasks they are working on. So yeah, and that's a very good point. My feeling is that if you take most enterprise teams that work on transferring data from one place to another, and that create API endpoints with REST API and so on. Here you have a very well-defined problem, and you can use the coding assistance to speed up this whole process in very easily. Of course, there will be some challenges. Maybe it won't get performance right, and we might not get scalability right, but yeah, that's why these are assistants. You should be using them as people and not just let them do their own thing. We'll come back to that. I know that right now the whole the story is that you can have these assistants solve bugs for you and so on, and maybe they can, and you know, let them try. Why not? But I'm not sure they will be capable of doing that in a highly complex system. I would definitely leave that on a simple open source library, or maybe what we need to do is to simplify our code to separate things better. But then the skill becomes how to separate things into smaller things in a much better way so that we can also take advantage of these assistants to kind of fix bugs, find bugs, fix bugs for us with reviews from actual developers. Putting the heuristic to a test. Let's put this estimation to a test with a case study. At one of our clients, our team gathered data about their usage of GitHub Copilot and documented their estimations on how much time they saved. The team tracked 150 tickets over time and documented task type, Copilot usage, and estimated time saved. So an example here is a ticket number, Copilot use yes, reason for usage or non-usage, generated business code, estimated time saved 30%. Another one, Copilot was not used, bug fix for a known issue that only needed a tiny code change, so they haven't used Copilot for that. Another issue, used Copilot to generate code and test data, 40%. So I think here's another thing where we might need to pay a lot of attention is I think Copilot is great at generating test data. It's also quite useful at generating test code. But my experience is very different from the experience of other people because what I do, I use test-driven development, which means I define the test. I know what I want to test. I generate and it helps me generate the data and the test code and so on. It takes what I already wrote in the test suite and does variations on that. Now this leads to a bit of duplication that I have to fix later on, but it's part of the process. Because what I want to end up with is as much data-driven tests as possible. But particularly when you have complex data or slight variations, and it helps with naming tests and so on, it is of assistance. But it's really a good code complete, or a better code complete. I don't feel it's just saving me a huge amount of time. It is saving me 10%, 20% when doing this, but it's also creating me some issues because sometimes it generates things. I need to change those. It tries to, it keeps suggesting things, and sometimes those are annoying. But overall, I think it's helpful, particularly when you do this test-driven development process. I've seen it quite useful. I believe it might also be useful for generating code and test data for legacy systems, for systems that are not tested and you want to understand them. It will probably be good at explaining what existing systems do if you take them maybe on limited scope, function by function, or class by class. Where I don't see it quite working is on large systems. That might be a problem. Okay, generated shell scripts, 50%. Yeah, I think so. Although you have to pay attention that it doesn't generate something really complicated. But it was really good at generating shell scripts, I concur. Overall estimation of time savings. Based on the overall number of tickets and the estimations of time saved per ticket, the team came to the following conclusions of overall time saved with their sprints. In the period of the study, the team used GitHub Copilot for about 50% of their tickets. When Copilot was used, it was used to support these rough categories of tasks: generating tests 23%, generating business code 41%, generating scripts 13%, understanding code 23%. The estimated improvement when GitHub Copilot was used was about 30%, generating tests 28%, generating business code 30%, generating scripts 39%, understanding code 22%. Development work accounted for about 55% of the team's total time. This means there was an approximate cycle time improvement of about 8% in this particular case. 8%. What was Copilot used for? Most of the examples where teams indicated that Copilot was particularly useful were related to tasks involving repetitive or boilerplate code. When developers use Copilot to generate API contracts and new fields to request bodies or write script functions, they estimated significant time savings, often in the range of 30 to 50%. Yeah, that's what I was expecting. That's what I noticed as well. At the same time, we found the generating business function code can also be faster by 10-40%, but the usefulness of AI assistance is limited by the business context, and the probability of the generated code being adjusted is relatively high. Yeah. So it's kind of creating more work sometimes. This led us to the conclusion that what's difficult for the developers is also difficult for Copilot. Interesting conclusion. To improve Copilot's accuracy and reduce the need for adjustments, it's essential to clearly define business functions, break tasks down into smaller tasks, and provide specific and detailed prompts. This will enhance the quality and precision of the generated code. Yeah, but that's a skill in itself. And once you do that, then the rest might be quite fast. I mean, yeah. Test generation was another area where the teams use the coding assistance for tasks like generating unit tests or generating text data. Teams estimate the savings between 15 and 50% of their time, especially when writing basic tests for existing code. Copilot's efficiency helped accelerate the process, allowing developers to focus on more complex aspects of their work. Yeah. The team also had the workflow to use Copilot for test-driven development. This is interesting. By generating initial failing tests for new functions or getting suggestions for additional tests to improve code coverage, including edge cases and exception handling. This is a very good point. So that's something that you can do with all AI assistants, which is useful. You give them something and you say, what is missing? What do I need to add? You know, and that's a really good, they tend to be very good at that. Continued use the TDD with and without a coding assistant increases code quality and mitigates potential risks associated with Copilot usage. Yes. By reviewing a test first, developers can more systematically validate if the generated code is doing what they expect it to do. Explaining and analyzing code also proves somewhat useful with Copilot, though the estimated time save was often lower than for tickets or teams generated code between 10 and 40%. Right. So this is incredibly interesting because it shows some of the things that I expected, right? The more specific the context, the better is Copilot and other code assistants at helping you. And that's a very interesting observation. When developers choose not to use Copilot, so let's see, I find this very interesting because it can show the attitude of developers towards AI, but it also shows limitations of AI. So let's see. First of all, incident response. Some teams, especially those working on legacy projects, spend a considerable portion of their time responding to on-call support, where they need to check logs, runtime environments across different systems. This kind of real-time diagnostic works across systems is beyond the scope of GitHub Copilot. Yeah. So maybe some integration with the monitoring tools. That's where we'll see. I expect to see some improvements in this area, particularly when it comes to monitoring. It might allow you to question when discuss with a large language model to identify places in logs that are important or trends that are important in monitoring. But the problem here is that, as we have seen, these tools are not particularly good at numbers and analysis. So they probably need to be combined with something else. So that's interesting. We'll see what happens. There is some potential for improvement. Simple or minor code changes, yeah, so they didn't. Developers, for simple bug fixes or minor code changes, developers found it faster to manually write the code rather than use Copilot. Yeah. Complex business logic and refactoring, again, not a big surprise. Copilot can help with refactoring. I think it can help with naming. I think it can help with maybe with suggestions, although no, not really. Refactoring is still pretty much something that a developer needs to do right now. Do you feel differently? Let me know. Vulnerability fixes. Tickets involving security fixes or vulnerability patches were often completed manually or with existing deterministic tooling, as they require precision and attention to detail. Again, not surprising, AI tools are not really good at precision. So it makes sense to use tools that are precise. Now, one thing you could do with Copilot, though, is to write security tests that cover a specific vulnerability. So in writing your unit tests, particularly when you do test-driven development, once you have the functionality in place, what you could do is to add some tests focused on security that check potential vulnerabilities. And those are useful. And I think those can be created with Copilot, but actually fixing vulnerabilities, well, you could first create the test and then fix the vulnerability, right? And use Copilot for the first part. What did we learn about the impact of Copilot on developer speed? This case study is one of the many data points that aligns with our original heuristic. At other organizations, even without detailed tracking of Copilot usage, we observe similar levels of estimated impact on team speed of between 5 and 15%. And so far, we haven't encountered a single team claiming a 50% reduction in cycle time with GitHub Copilot or anything near that level. Is this bad news for coding assistants then? Does this mean that they are not worth the hassle and the money? No, we are still recommending coding assistants used to our clients, and we still believe they are here to stay. Now, there are a few challenges with that, and I'm gonna touch on those in a moment. Anchoring effect, yeah, so there were some materials that said that 50% improvement, but it's actually 10-15%. Well, I don't like that since that 10-15% are not a lot. So the actual number is between 5 and 15, although the actual number from the initial one is between 2 and 15. So cost benefit. Today's coding assistants cost less than 0.01% of what a typical delivery team's run rate is. Yeah. Now it depends on how many of these you buy, right? How many licenses. The tools are still a moving target, indeed. That's one thing that I think it will improve. One thing that I'll be interested in is, so imagine this. You generate during the day, you clarify the requirements. You split it into, let's say, user stories, and then user stories into smaller tasks, and you describe those. And while you're away, the coding assistants take care of generating that code so that it fits all those requirements. And maybe you can work on multiple projects like that, or, there's a different kind of work, a different structure of work. Or you maybe a new simpler scenario, or a more natural scenario would be you work on a piece where you generate some requirements and stuff, you give it to large language models, then you move to the next one, give it, and so on, and kind of switch from those during a day. But I think the interesting thing will be to see when assistants can work by themselves. And of course they need prompts, but the question is, will we be able to give them prompts like optimize performance for this, or improve usability here, or those are the real questions, because if they get to that point, then yeah, software development becomes much less than what it is now, and it's much more about giving instructions to AI assistants. My feeling right now is that this doesn't work, because what you need to do right now is prompt, see what it generates, review, and fix. So it's this cycle, this continuous cycle. And I don't yet see a way around this. Now, you may have parts of it done also by AI assistants, or maybe you have an AI assistant that does the review, an AI assistant that does the implementation. Is more like a team of AI doing that. But I still believe we are kind of far away from that. What they try to do now is those assistants that solve bugs automatically on Git. And let's see how that goes. I think they will definitely be able to solve some bugs, but not all of them. And with some of them, the solutions will be wrong. So it's still, yeah, we're still learning how to use these, but they are here to stay. I don't think they are going away. Cycle time is not the full picture. The numbers in this article are only looking at cycle time estimations when we need to consider overall productivity across research, planning, analysis, development, testing, deployment, and maintenance. There are also many other dimensions to consider. It can be impacted by AI tools like onboarding time, learning time, and increase in test coverage. Finally, we want to caution that the amount of effort spent on tracking and measuring speed improvements from coding assistants in a very detailed way can be wasted efforts. Developer surveys show over and over again that there is value here for developer experience. We recommend that organizations instead look at the big picture, how they are monitoring delivery effectiveness overall, fixate less on speed and less on how this one tool impacts the team, improve the real available development time of developers, and at the same time make the problems and tasks as clear as specific as possible before using a coding assistant. Spend that energy on monitoring the medium to long-term risks of introducing coding assistants. And then I love the disclaimer. The statements and opinions expressed in this article are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the positions of Thoughtworks. This is funny. It seems like yeah, we published all these, but yeah. Anyway, so, okay, so what can we take away from this? First, coding assistants, are they useful? Yes, they are. They are useful for various areas. We keep discovering places where they are useful. We are not yet at the point of a stable collaboration between a developer and the coding assistant where we kind of know how to do this job. Will AI assistants influence the whole software development process? I think so, because they are very good places for DevOps, for testing, for analysis, for security. There are a lot of places where we can integrate these assistants. They can give us not necessarily a precise analysis, but you can use them as reviewers. As I mentioned, one thing where they are doing really well based on my experience and on what I'm hearing is that you take something and you, let's say a strategy or an analysis or a description, and you say, okay, what's missing from this? And it's a more complex problem, but that's basically the gist of it. And you ask it what's missing from this, and you get a list of things that might be missing, and then it's up to you to improve that. So they can be very useful in making, let's say, more complete analysis of edge cases or a more complete security threat model or all kind of stuff like that, right? Are they useful in creating the artifacts? Sometimes, but it's hit and miss, right? And as a rule of thumb, from what I've seen, the more specialized the domain, I mean, the more limited the domain, the better these assistants are. But this is if and only if that domain has been treated before. If this is a completely new domain, you're on your own, right? Still, let's not forget that there are a few issues with these assistants that they don't mention. There's the issue of potential copyright infringement. There's the issue of copyright infringement by using other people's code or artifacts, even if it's not exactly that, or maybe sometimes it will be exactly that. So this might be a problem, particularly for large companies who don't want to deal with that. Another issue is sharing information. So the question that comes to mind is, okay, I'm using this model, but will it share information with other people? Will it use the information to train itself, and then that information be used for others? Now, most companies say not. They don't do that, but there's still a question and the risk for large companies, because they will say, okay, but they say it doesn't happen. What if it does? What if our code comes up, or our customer data appears somewhere else? Would that would be a big problem for us, so maybe we need to limit the usage of these tools. So there are still some barriers to entry. The next one, of course, is training. You need to understand how to use those, and when they make sense, what to expect from them. And then, of course, it's about productivity. Do these things help, or just create more work? And the answer to that is, it depends on the specific scenario. Sometimes they help, sometimes they create more work. Because you might get a document that you need to read and then fix a lot of things in it, or code. And that is not necessarily helpful. But can they help within a constrained specific context? Yes, absolutely. And for specific problems. So I think this is where we are. So the experience with coding assistants will vary a lot depending on how you are using them. That's the key thing. So maybe if you just see an improvement of 2%, it's just the problem is that you're not using them as you should. But I don't believe you'll get over 50%, as they will say. Probably 2 to 13%. That's or 2 to 15%. That's kind of like where we are as a range. And maybe you can get, I don't know, 5 to 15% is what I would imagine right now. But it depends a lot on what you're doing. If a lot of your work is repetitive and so on, it might actually speed up development. So the only thing we can say from all this is that you need to try it, see what the results are, and adapt. Maybe get some training, or maybe get some practice, somebody who has used AI before, AI coding assistants, and can sit down with your developers and actually work with them, how to write prompts, and see what correct the outputs, and work through those things, and maybe figure out a better method for you to use. Test-driven development is quite a good way to develop software with coding assistants. It's even better than before, and it was really good. So this is kind of where we are, and we need, and you need to measure and kind of see the effects on your code, and so on. One thing that I dislike is figuring out that we should replace humans with AI. I think that's the wrong approach. I don't think AI can do everything right now, and I don't think we'll have AGI. No matter what the people who are selling AI, they want to tell you that, yeah, of course, AGI is just around the corner and so on. But they have a vested interest in that. This is how they get money. They get money from investors who believe that AGI is around the corner. And, good for them. But it doesn't mean that it's actually, it will actually going to happen. This is what I believe. All right, so what do you think about all this? Have you used coding assistants? What were your results? Let me know in the comments. We love comments, and we love that you helped us go over 800 subscribers. Now it would be fun to move to closer to 1,000. What do you think? Thank you kindly for the view, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart. See you next Saturday.